So, good morning, everyone. It's 10 a.m. We will kick off. So, there's quite a few people here already. So, hello, welcome to our first webinar of the year. Obviously, now we're well into 2021. I thought it'd be good to kick off our webinar series again by focusing on a topic which is getting a lot of attention nationally and internationally for various reasons, and that's the importance of company culture. So we started these webinars over a year ago now to provide an overview and introduction to a range of topics that can affect food business owners and managers. And obviously the issue of culture in food businesses is it's a challenging one to get into, but we're going to do our best here today. As a discipline in the food industry, it's still in its infancy. So metrics and theories are still being developed and tested. However, in other industries, company culture around safety has been studied and measured in great detail. So there's much that can be learnt and brought across to the food industry. This presentation will therefore touch on many concepts, some of which may be familiar to you and some of which may be new. So I'll include plenty of links to more information, and we'll have some tools for you for people who want to delve a bit deeper into the subject. So we'll start with an overview of food safety culture, a definition, what is it, why is it important? I'll then be looking at some of the consequences of a poor company culture in terms of safety, and some examples of how we can all make a difference to improve the culture, before launching into some metrics and providing some tools that can be used to establish a baseline and chart progress towards implementation of a more integrated culture that puts food safety at the top of the list. Firstly, though, just before we kick off, just want to gauge where everyone feels their company is now in terms of having a culture that prioritizes food safety. So I'm going to have a quick poll. I'll keep it on the screen for about 30 seconds to give you a chance to answer. So is food safety the #1 priority for the leaders of your company at the moment? And by the way, the poll's anonymous, so you can be as honest as you want. Just a few more seconds, there's still a few coming through. Okay, we'll just close it there and show you the results. It's fairly encouraging. So we can see that 57% of you said yes, food safety is the #1 priority. And the rest, if you said no, yes, and if you're not sure, then that's probably in the no camp as well. I think if it's the priority, everyone would know about it. So it's good to see a majority have food safety as the #1 priority. Okay, so let's move on. Thank you for that. So culture is broadly described as how we do things around here. It's the sum of all activities and attitudes in a collection of individuals that both influences and drives behaviors. It's often without us even being aware of the influence. So it's about people, human behaviors, and the impact of these on our end product, whether that's a new food product or a lab test or a report. It really doesn't matter how much we know if we're not empowered to use that knowledge to make things better or to do our best. Culture, therefore, is behavior-based, and it can be improved exponentially by recognizing this and taking steps to improve it. So whether you work in the food industry or, as we've seen sort of recently, politics, workplace or business culture can have a massive impact on your ability to deliver what you set out to achieve. Just an example, obviously I work for ALS, a food testing lab. It's a global lab with lots of different divisions to it. Because of the nature of the work that we do across the whole business and the potential for employees to be seriously harmed, senior leaders some time ago focused on safety. It was a conscious decision. Safety considerations are embedded in the culture of the company, whether someone works in the food and pharmaceutical space or mining, environmental, whatever division. Global and local meetings, they begin with a safety catch-up. Have there been any near misses? Are there any concerns about processes, etc.? There are monthly team and site level discussions on a whole range of safety topics that could impact staff, including written, oral, video material. Data's captured and a range of simple metrics are used to spot potential issues before they become big ones. And these are shared globally across the organization. And because of this laser focus on safety, there are very few serious safety incidents globally, so it does work. So you may not have heard of either of these two people, or you may have, but between them, they've had a major impact on how regulators and businesses view food safety. Frank Yanis is the current Deputy Commissioner for Food Policy and Response at the FDA in the USA. In 2009, he published a book called Food Safety Culture, which advocated a behavior-based food safety management approach. The other person, Lone Jesperson, is one of the world's leading food safety culture proponents, and through her company Cultivate, she provides consulting to government agencies, large businesses, on how to implement a behavior-based food safety culture. She's also currently the chair of the food safety culture for the GFSI Technical Working Group, where they're characterizing and quantifying food safety culture from farm to fork. So her approach and that of Frank Yanis is to try to take a scientific approach to what was previously viewed as sort of an unscientific area, soft skills. And since the publication of the Frank Yanis book and the work of Lone Jesperson in particular, to spread the word about the impact of culture on food safety, many academics and regulators have also weighed in with research, resources, and support to help enable businesses to recognize the impact that a positive food safety culture can have. So let's first try to define what food safety culture actually is or means. And if we can't define it, we won't be able to measure and improve it. The food safety culture of a food business is how everyone, so the owners, the managers, the employees, thinks and acts in their daily job to make sure the food they make or serve is safe. And it's not just about having pride in producing safe food every time or recognizing that a good quality product must be safe to eat. It's a recognition that in every food business, food safety should be the top priority. So the GFSI, the Global Food Safety Initiative, defined food safety culture as the shared values, beliefs, and norms that affect mindset and behavior towards food safety in, across, and throughout an organization, which is quite a mouthful, but it can be summed up as food safety is everyone's responsibility, not just the quality teams. So a strong culture that promotes food safety comes from people at all levels of the business, understanding the importance of making safe food and committing to doing whatever it takes every time. Starts at the top, it needs to start at the top, but it requires everybody's support across the whole business. And what we tend to find is that the responsibility, or we have found in the past, clearly not with a lot of people already on this webinar, a lot of the responsibility for producing safe food rests almost entirely with what is loosely termed the quality team in food companies. And they've tended to be quite small teams. So the quality manager usually would have responsibility for the HACCP plan, making sure the testing's completed, the food safety training is undertaken, etc. And unfortunately, it's a role that also tends to be very much production focused and audit compliance focused, and it can be a reactive role. So with the whole responsibility for the safety of the product in the food company resting on the shoulders of a quality manager who also has to deal with production issues, customer related complaints and staff issues, it's not surprising that the job can become one that involves a lot of tick and flick, box ticking, and little in the way of strategy, development and implementation. So why is it important? Well, having a culture that promotes the food safety and values that include producing safe food at the heart of the business, it's vitally important to your customers. People expect their food to be safe at all times, and there's an inherent trust in food companies to have this basic requirement as their number one priority. Obviously, in spite of this, there are still an estimated 4.1 million cases of foodborne illness every year in Australia, and an estimated 76 deaths. I'm not sure how accurate these figures are because they're about 10 years old and they don't collect this sort of information much anymore. But the figures are higher than we want them to be. And obviously the human cost of poor food safety practices can be devastating to those that are on the receiving end of it. But food safety incidents and the publicity that goes around them, they can be bad news for the business as well. So the reputational damage caused by a high profile food poisoning outbreak can be difficult to recover from. It may take some time to re-establish trust. There are also a direct and indirect and quite significant sometimes business costs associated with food safety incidents, which can impact the long-term business prospects. So just have a breakdown of those costs in a little bit more detail. The true cost or full cost of a food safety incident can impact the long-term viability of a business. It includes sort of one or more of the areas highlighted here. If you have to implement a recall or a withdrawal of your product due to a contamination or a food safety incident, the direct costs of doing so include logistics, staff time, disposal, advertising, etc. There'll generally be a downturn in sales of both the affected product and other similar or related products, possibly from the same business. And some incidents can impact or deflate a whole industry sector, even if your particular business isn't directly related to the recall. The subsequent publicity around it can cause people to not buy the product at all. If you remember a few years ago, contaminated rock melons. So it can have severe consequences, not just for one business, but for several. Once the incident's over, there may be impacts on the business in the form of insurance premiums increasing, damage to the brand over the long term, customer trust will be broken, retailers cancelling supply contracts, etc. There may be legal action by regulators who can impose penalties or fines, and customers may want to sue. So some researchers have attempted to provide tools, because they love to do that sort of thing, for calculating the potential cost of a recall to a food business. There's a tool here which I was going to go through it, but sometimes things look like they could be quite easily explained when they're on paper, and when you actually in a situation trying to explain it to 100 people on a webinar, it's not quite so easy to go through. So what I will say is that there's a recall cost calculator that's been produced by researchers. I have all the details of it, and when we send out the link to the recording of the webinar, I'll also send out the details of the cost calculator. It's quite useful if you wanted to, if you need, for example, to make a case to senior leaders that the culture and food safety of the business needs a bit more attention. This will help to put it into terms which the guys with the spreadsheets can understand as well. Basically, it works out that for this particular example, the cost for a recall was around $25,000, and that's in a company that would turn over about 1.4 million. So earlier I mentioned the GFSI definition of food safety culture. It was a bit of a mouthful, but for those who haven't heard of GFSI, and you probably all have, it's a business-driven initiative develops food safety management systems to ensure food facilities are processing safe food for consumers. It produces the benchmark standards that member standard schemes must comply with. And in 2018, GFSI published a position paper on food safety culture, which was led by Lone Jespersen, as I mentioned earlier, and it included many of the concepts which had previously been explored by Frank Janus and Lone Jespersen herself. And this culminated in February last year when it was announced that the 2020 version of the GFSI benchmark standards included a new food safety culture element. It had already been around in some of the schemes that subscribe to GFSI. So the new standard promoted the continuous improvement model, which you can see on the slides here. It's based on 6 steps: expectations, education and training, communications, goals and accountability, which is really important, measurement, and reinforcement. And we'll revisit this model a little bit later and go into it in a bit more detail, and I'll provide links to it as well when I send out the recording. So one of the questions I get asked when I talk to people outside of the food industry, they often ask why there are still so many food safety incidents when we focus so many resources on food safety planning and programs, and HACCP is there. And you know, it's a question that troubled food safety professionals for a long time. You know, are the various HACCP plans and food safety systems that are in place, are they rubbish? You know, they've been badly written. In some cases, yes, but the more complete answer is that a food safety plan or a HACCP plan, no matter how well written or comprehensive, it's essentially just, it's a document, it's a plan. So it can be read, it can be followed, or it can be ignored. And what matters is how the plan is implemented and where the emphasis is placed by the business. Is it safety first? Is it compliance first? Is it all about passing audits? Or is it profit first? You know, is the safety side just something that comes along behind? As humans, we have free will still for now, and sometimes people working in food facilities choose not to follow or implement known good hygiene practices. So again, this has been studied. They indicate that whilst some aspects of this type of behavior relate specifically to the individual, someone can have a bee in their bonnet, and just, you know, be that type of person, over 40% of hygiene failures can be traced back to the prevailing organizational culture around the food safety. So what this means is that food handlers will only be as hygiene focused as the business and the leadership within it requires them to be, or allows them to be, or encourages them to be. So the key here is that whatever your own food safety plan states, your company will already have a food safety culture. It may be a positive one, it may not be. So just on that note, just want to have a quick poll, and this one is about the responsibility for food safety. And the question is, who is primarily responsible for the food safety function in your company? Is it the quality or the team manager? Is it the technical manager? Is it nobody? Is it the owner manager, the owner or the manager, the senior management? Or is it a cross-functional food safety team that's been put up specifically to look at it? So just leave it on for a few more seconds here. Still got a couple more coming in. Thank you everyone for taking part. Again, this is anonymous. Must stress that each time. I always remember to click the box. Okay, so I think that I'll just share these results here. That's fairly conclusive. Generally, it's the quality team and the manager that have responsibility. There we go. So it's good to see that, you know, just over a quarter of you. It's a cross-functional food safety team, which is great because you get different perspectives on things as well. So that's very interesting. Thank you. Okay, so let's carry on. So nowhere is the impact of culture more starkly demonstrated, especially for people of my age that can remember the first one, than in the two major disasters that happened with the Challenger and Columbia space shuttles. And they were in 1986 and 2003, respectively. So NASA, the North American Space Agency, which gave the world HACCP, in spite of this, it was the culture of the organization that was called into question after these two catastrophic disasters that exposed some deep-rooted senior management lapses in responsibility for safety. In 1986, Challenger exploded just 76 seconds after launch, killing all 7 people on board. Then in 2003, the unthinkable happened again as Columbia exploded on re-entry, again killing all 7 people on board. During the investigations, it was found that the cause of the Challenger explosion was a failure in an O-ring seal on one of the booster rockets due to the very low temperatures at launch. And the Columbia accident was caused by a piece of foam breaking off during launch and damaging the wing, something that happened previously during launches, so there were warnings, but obviously with less devastating impacts. And despite the physical causes of these two disasters, so if they did a root cause analysis, they'd probably stop there, well, it was the O-rings that did it, or it was the bit of foam breaking off that caused the damage that did it. But actually, it was ultimately the culture that existed in NASA throughout the period before and spanning these two devastating incidents that contributed significantly to the disasters. In both cases, concerns were raised by technicians in advance of launch. They were either ignored or they were deemed not serious enough to warrant action by the management. And in the Columbia Accident Investigation Board of 2003, they stated, in our view, the NASA organizational culture had as much to do with this accident as the foam. And this is a pretty stark reminder that no matter how big the organization, how intricate and thorough the plans and planning, how intelligent the teams are, the organizational culture can still have a disproportionately catastrophic impact on safety. So when conducting root cause analysis, you need to take that extra step. It could be faulty design, yes. It could be operator error, yes. It could be improper training, yes. But actually, you need to go that little bit further and look at organizational culture. Is that really at the root of it? So who creates the culture of an organization? Ultimately, the people who are responsible for the culture are the senior leaders, as it's their actions, decisions, attitudes, and daily focus which determines how others in the organization can behave. Researchers, again, found that organizations with a good safety culture showed consistently high levels of trust. In these businesses, effective communication, management credibility, and an overall value of safety were considered to be really important. A positive culture rarely happens by accident. It's good news if you want to improve it. Now, researchers by the name of McAleese and Hargey identified 5 guiding principles of culture management. These included formulating an overall culture strategy, the development of cultural leaders and champions, sharing the culture with staff by empowering, motivating, and providing performance feedback, establishing metrics to measure cultural performance, and a continuous commitment to customer satisfaction. So the good news from the research is that even if the company doesn't currently have a great food safety culture, a strategy can be developed and changes can be made fairly quickly. There needs to be a conscious choice taken by the leadership of the company, who first of all must clearly define and commit to safety as a foundational value. And that's really important, that if it's enshrined in the values of the company. Companies that have previously been reactive and that they comply at a basic level with what's been imposed by regulators or customers, you can become proactive by making this choice. It's important to grasp the concept that values are stronger than priorities, because priorities can change depending on corporate business goals and challenges that come up. Whereas values are deep-seated beliefs and principles that guide the company on how it makes decisions and conducts its business. It's in the DNA of the company. It's not just sort of this year's goal. So where do we start? As we previously looked at it, it all flows from conscious leadership, food safety leadership. It's not a phrase you would have heard a lot. It's usually called food safety management, but it's an important distinction to make. Leaders inspire and influence people, whereas management is centered more on control and creating predictable results. Both obviously are required if a business is to successfully implement a positive culture, but the initial vision and embedding of values, they'll be driven by a leader or a leadership team with the authority to make the changes necessary. So a basic strategic approach is to start with the current situation. Where are we now? Your intended destination, where do we want to be? Mode of travel, how do we get there? Resources, what do we need? And review, how do we keep improving? Let's take a practical look now at each of these elements and see what we can do to get the ball rolling. I should note here, again, I think that it's a relatively new discipline in the food industry, although other industries have been doing it for a lot longer. So metrics and tools are still being developed and refined in terms of food safety. So the easiest and most effective way to assess the current situation is through a survey. There are lots of different free resources that can help you do this. For example, on the Fazan's website, there's a questionnaire that can be tailored to your business. That's it on the screen there. I've summarized all the questions. They're fairly basic, but there's 9 questions. You can access the full PDF from the link at the bottom of the slide if you want to get it for yourself and make amendments. The best way to get honest feedback, obviously, is to make it anonymous, which is why I always make my polls anonymous. There are a few other free resources you can use that will help you send out and collect the responses anonymously. For example, if your company has a Microsoft 365 subscription, you can use Microsoft Forms, and just hopefully this will work. Just click on that. I created a Microsoft form. It was fairly straightforward. No, it's not going to work. I need to sign in. Sorry about that. Anyway, you can use Microsoft Forms if you have a 365 account. I've created a template, and what I'll do is I'll share it with you guys if you want to maybe use it for yourself. You can, if you've used Microsoft 365 and the forms before, it's very customizable. You can add in your own logos and pictures, etc. Google Forms as well, that's another free service. You can use that one. Again, it's editable, customizable, so you can sort of include your own company branding. And I've created one of those, and I can share a link to that with you as well. So if you have a Gmail account, or you can easily set up a free one, you can share that and create your own version. So I'll send these out at the end of the webinar when I send out the link to the recording. But they're very simple to create. It takes about 5 or 10 minutes. It's just, I think it's really important that when you share it with your staff, you make sure that it's anonymous, so you can put a link on the intranet, or you can send it out via email, but don't collect email addresses off your staff so that they know that it's anonymous. Okay, so whatever your starting point turns out to be, and obviously a lot of you guys have a very good starting point. And the end point is that you're looking for is a business that's committed to prioritizing food safety by having a culture where producing safe food is seen as everybody's responsibility and is embedded in the values of the company. It's in the DNA. It's not as woolly a concept as it used to be thought of as, and may at first appear. We need obviously strong leaders in place who can embed safe food values throughout the business. You need committed and knowledgeable managers who have the power, they're empowered to make the changes necessary to drive that commitment to food safety. All your staff must feel able and engaged enough to contribute. So it's not a blame game. It's about harnessing everybody's input, where they speak up on safety risks, try to encourage and reward recognition of where possible failures may be. There needs to be accountability at all levels of the business. It should be modeled and championed by the leaders, being accountable, demonstrating best practice, walking the talk. You want a business that's proactive, which is actively seeking improvements and backing it up with accurate metrics that can show real progress and sharing that with everyone. So how do you do that? How do you get there? Well, if it's not already in place, it's a change process, and change begins with an initial commitment to that change, again from the leaders. A process won't work without the absolute and genuine commitment of the senior management team. They'll understand, they should have an understanding the culture they create within the business has a direct impact on the food safety outcomes, which ultimately affects the bottom line. This is the starting point. It won't work without the senior leaders being behind the project. They empower the managers to support these values and encourage the staff to participate at every level. Reviewing progress helps to make adjustments and better target efforts and resources. You need to make adjustments, be agile. We also need training. It's not just standard food hygiene training. We do a 20-minute course online and answer questions that are really obvious. But the training of your leaders and managers in new skills, conscious or mindful leadership, values-driven leadership, training in communication skills. It doesn't have to be expensive. There are many resources available online, free, etc., that are adequate for this. And what do you need? When embarking on the journey, you need some reference resources. Obviously, I've previously mentioned the Fazan's resources, which I highly recommend. There are plenty of others available online. For example, Cultivate Food Safety is Lone Jesperson's website. It has a lot of free resources and information that can help along the road, particularly things such as the maturity model, which has been developed. If you follow the link on this slide, and I'll provide it again in the email that I send out later today, you can get access to all of those resources. As I mentioned, the maturity model, that's one of the key ones which has been developed. You may have heard about it, and it very basically states that each business can be placed along a line of maturity in relation to have an embedded food safety culture, from an initial low maturity state of having doubts about the benefits of food safety culture to a highly sophisticated and mature level. So at the lower end of the maturity model, companies can make a difference by focusing on simple regulatory derived activities, such as whether the training schedule's kept up to date and staff are being trained in food safety, for example. Progress can be encouraged by making this a KPI for a particular team leader or a training manager, and having that instead of or as well as compliance with the annual audit, for example, which is, an audit happens obviously far too often for most of our liking, but it's 1 or 2 days at a time, and you actually want your food to be safe every day. A simple tool from another area that I have a lot of interest in is Six Sigma, and it's called the Gemba Walk, and we'll have a quick look at that. Gemba is a Japanese word meaning the real place. So a Gemba walk is about getting down to where the work happens to learn about how things are really done. And when I was a much younger man and doing this sort of thing, it was called management by walking about, where the manager would go and walk around the site and grab a few people and go with them. And it's a great tool really for spotting any disconnect between written procedures and your actual processes as they're done in real life on the shop floor, as well as an opportunity to find out from the people actually doing the job how things can be improved. So if you bring a multifunctional team or a multifunctional approach to the process, you'll learn more and be able to spot more areas for improvement. It's important to start off with a plan, so plan it in advance. You don't want people to feel like they've done something wrong if you suddenly rock up with 5 observers and start asking questions. But culture, let everyone know what you're doing, why you're doing it, that you'll be observing and asking questions about what they're doing, but that the ultimate aim is ensuring that the food safety procedures are fit for purpose and where, if anywhere, improvements can be made. You need to ask lots of questions in order to understand what's being done and why. Record what you observe, either as notes, photos, video, or preferably a mixture of all. And the point is to learn. It's so that you can improve the situation and processes. And finally, really important at the end is, once you've done this whole process, is communicating your findings and your next steps. What have you learned and what are you going to do about it? This is really crucial so that everyone feels included and they remember that everybody came around and they asked questions and this is what's happening as a result. So follow-up is vital. Continuous improvement, you hear it a lot, and it's a combination of multiple factors, some of which are summarized in this graphic. It needs to start with a strategic perspective, a vision and mission. It includes looking at the business structure, its values and purpose. These inform the direction the business takes and helps leaders to provide consistent messaging and expectations. Organizations obviously consist of people. One of the key requirements when seeking to improve the culture and food safety outcomes is communication. Staff need to know what the business is about. Providing incentives and rewards that support food safety priorities and outcomes is really important, as is recognizing the desired behaviors whenever they occur. So it doesn't have to be expensive, a thank you, or just noticing what people are doing. Agility and adaptability, they're almost cliches now, these words, but they're essential skills for any business owner and leader to implement. Change and crisis management, problem solving skills, are all needed to help staff and management navigate the sometimes choppy waters of a change process and food safety procedures in general. And this is where consistency comes in. People need to be accountable without there being a blame culture. Performance measurements should be geared towards outcomes that support the larger strategic aims, and clearly documented policies and procedures need to be in place to ensure that everyone knows what to do and when. Consistency and being proactive will help move away from the old style that may be there of reactive firefighting, feeling like you haven't got enough time to do what you do. Hazard analysis and risk awareness training should be cascaded to everyone in the business at a level, obviously, that's commensurate with the risks inherent in a particular role. So, for example, the IT or the accounts function, you wouldn't receive the same level of training in food safety hazards as those working on the packing line, but they should have a knowledge and awareness of where the major food safety risks in the business lie. Measure what you treasure. The father of modern business management, Peter Drucker, is credited with saying, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So therefore, you should always ensure that if something is important to you, you need to be able to measure it in some tangible way. Employees pay attention to behaviors that are rewarded as well as to what goes unnoticed by leaders. So leaders can set an example, as we mentioned earlier, by walking the talk, demonstrating behaviors that are consistent with food safety values being at the heart of the business. It's been estimated that improving the culture of a food business can save the company around $17,000 per employee. So how do we choose the right metrics to drive improvements in culture? And again, it depends where you are on that maturity model, but just simply aligning bonuses with audit performance won't necessarily work, as culture is about what happens day in and day out, not once in 365 days or twice. You'll need a good mix of lagging and leading indicators that can demonstrate how well food production and sanitation processes are working and how well staff are performing their roles. Once in place, a further metric is how well the measurement systems are being used by management. So I mentioned earlier about ALS and how our leaders focus very heavily on safety in the business. And one of our key business drivers, one of our values, and it's embedded in the every day of the business, is safety as a priority, and it's enshrined deeply in the ALS culture from the top down. So everybody in the business knows that. So in your monthly talks and your team meetings and everything, these messages need to keep being relayed and hammered home, and the leadership need to demonstrate it as well. So it doesn't have to be expensive to implement the right measurements. Many of the metrics or many of a lot of the data would already be in place, but it may not be focused on currently. So for example, how many staff have formal food hygiene or food safety training? Who's received on the job training? How many food safety near misses are there? Weekly, monthly, annually? Do you know this? Do you keep a record? Do you trend results from your food testing? Do you collect and digitize the pre-operational hygiene checks, the CCP monitoring, etc.? If you do that, are the records kept electronically? Does anyone look at them? Does anybody have time to look at them? Do senior managers know what they are? Can they spot patterns and track changes? So all of this sort of data may well be available, and it's just about shining a light on it with a strategic focus. So using the GFSI continuous improvement model we touched on earlier, we can design a broad strategy for ensuring you get the right culture in place to prioritize food safety. So there needs to be a recognition from senior leaders that they are responsible for the culture, and they can improve safety by setting specific behavioral expectations. Next, need to ensure that all staff are trained, not just to do their immediate tasks, but in wider food safety issues and basic food microbiology. It should be reiterated continually to staff that food safety is everybody's responsibility. It includes, the correct use of PPE, hand washing, cleaning procedures, but also helping each other by demonstrating good hygiene practices every time, and picking people up when they're not doing it. Communication, it's so important in any business, but even more so in food businesses looking to produce safe food day in, day out, every day. Senior leaders need to remember communication's a two-way street. Should be actively seeking feedback from those on the front line about possible issues, food safety near misses, attitudes to safety at the production level. Obviously, if you remember the harsh lessons from NASA, the accidents happened because senior management, they ignored or downplayed the warnings from their engineers, from the people who were on the ground who knew what was going on, raised issues and were ignored. And decisions were then made for reasons other than safety. For example, budgetary pressure to launch and these sort of things. It's an accident waiting to happen. And the goals are set by a food business, the goals that are set by a food business are important in shaping the sort of culture that's created. For example, a business that prioritizes profit over safety obviously will have employees in middle management or supervisory roles who feel pressured to make compromises on safety if it improves profits, and hence their own standing with leaders. Profit, of course, is vitally important to every business, However, when you're producing food, safety has to be the main driving value and priority. It has to underpin everyone else and be central to the goals set by the company. Closely related to goal setting is measuring what matters to food safety. So we saw in the previous slide, what we measure has an impact on culture and safety outcomes. So if all our metrics are based on profit margins, product outputs, speed and cost cutting, we'll very quickly create a culture where safety takes a backseat to churning out more units at lower price. As I mentioned before, it's vitally important to control costs as well, but not as the primary focus of the business when you're looking to improve safety, not at the expense of safety. Specific metrics need to be developed that recognize and help underpin the safety of the product, not just using paper-based monitoring systems, but digitalizing it, having digital food safety management systems wherever you can. These digital systems that are able to provide a level of transparency and strategic insight and interrogation of the data that's not been previously available using paper-based systems. And it can help both the recognition and on the accountability side. It can provide real-time actionable information and feedback, which is what you want to be looking at. Of course, the metrics chosen for each particular company will depend on size, available resources, and pretty much where you sit in the maturity model. A company just starting out on the journey with doubts on how culture change will help the business will be more focused on tick boxes that support regulatory driven requirements. But just by shining a light on it, you can start to improve that. And finally, the final piece is reinforcement, going over everything, monitoring, reviewing progress regularly, including updates in team and management meetings, making it a clear and obvious priority. So next steps, if you want to take this further, what are the next steps? If you're the business owner or senior manager, you could start with a basic overview of where you are at the moment. Perhaps use one of the surveys that were alluded to earlier, and gauge your staff's understanding of food safeties. Where are we now? This will help you formulate your strategy and will hopefully inform your commitment to making change if required. Encourage your team to get involved and tell you if there are any areas that need improving. Communicate. People react best when treated as adults and they feel that they're included in the decision-making process rather than being told what to do by a sort of a semi-distant hierarchical figure. Nobody likes that. For managers and team leaders, you can have a really significant impact on initiating or making a case for change if you feel that it's required. If something you've been thinking about for a while and you want to make that push, do your research, collect resources, and make a case that senior leadership team will understand. Maybe use the cost model from earlier, which I'll send through to you. Try to lead by example and in what you do daily, and support others to take that next step. And remember that a well-written and detailed food safety plan, it's only the starting point and not the end point. You really need to back it up with values and what you do every day. So that brings us to the end of the presentation today. See, there's there's a question from Max. Do you have examples of a Gemba walk? Yes, I can. I'll send that through, Max. And what I'll do is the recording will be sort of available later today, and I'll send a link to the recording for those who want to watch it again, and for those people that registered and have missed the live one. But I'll include links to everything that I've mentioned here, all the tools and the various forms that I've done for you, and yeah, we can give an example of the Gemba walk. Yeah, there's another question, any standard format for the Gemba walk? Well, the slide where I gave you the outline of it, that's a really good starting point. It's you know, there are also some tools that have examples of the sort of questions to ask, so I'll include links in that as well. So thank you for those questions. Yes, we will provide them, and obviously that interest will is quite handy, because the next webinar I'll be focusing on Lean Six Sigma and how some of the principles of that can be applied in food production and food manufacturing setting. So we'll give an overview of what Six Sigma and Lean Six Sigma actually are for those who are new to the subject, and also I'll provide a bit more detail on some of the tools and how they can be applied in food businesses. It's a really interesting subject, which I'm really glad to be doing a webinar on, and there's a lot of really good stuff in there that will help if you're setting out on this journey. The Gemba walk is part of that, so if you want to learn a little bit more about that and how it can be applied in the food industry, yep, tune into the next webinar, which will be in about a month's time, Friday the 30th of April, same time. Thank you to everyone for attending today. When you leave the webinar, you'll be presented with the option to fill in a questionnaire. Again, it's anonymous, and it helps when I'm looking at planning new webinars, if you can sort of give some feedback, and if you've got some ideas or things that you want to hear about, put some suggestions in there. All of the webinars after the first few have really been initiated by suggestions from people, so thank you, and keep them coming. Thank you very much for everyone for turning up today, and have a great day, great weekend, stay dry. That's it for today. Thank you.